Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us. And of course, I'd like to thank my colleague Lukman Shadrack for bringing you that first part of the show. Now, the Southern African Litigation Center has expressed its seriousness and concern by the ongoing reports of violation and international humanitarian law and grave human rights violations in Gaza since October the 7th this year. They have said the atrocities such as the killing and the targeting of innocent civilians must be stopped, investigated and prosecuted no matter which side of the conflict they occurred. Joining us now from the center is its consultant program manager, Melusi Simela. Melusi, thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Thank you so much for having us, and good evening to your viewers.
All right, Melusi, let's start off, of course, with that letter. I mean, it was quite a strong letter, wasn't it? And in that letter, you could sense it was all about accountability that probably needs to come from the Israeli side.
Right. And I think for us, it's always important that if you are going to look for a peaceful solution, it must always start with justice. And as the Southern Africa Litigation Center, we've been working across the continent, even though our focus is in Southern Africa, about promoting accountability, promoting transparency, promoting the rule of law. So as we have constantly been watching the horrific pictures that are being carried on all sorts of media houses, people are speaking on social media about the killing of innocent civilians, the killing of children, the killing of women, the killing of the elderly, the targeting of densely populated areas like hospitals, like refugee centers. I think it's horrifying for any rational human being to see. So this is what then moved us as the Southern African Litigation Center to write this letter to the 33 members who are in Africa, to the ICC and the Rome Statute, to say, look, this is an opportunity for you to raise your voice. This is an opportunity for you to actually call for accountability and actually promote the rule of law in global matters.
Melusi, Israel, I mean, and again, this is according to human rights organizations. Even the United Nations are saying that, look, these guys have broken many of the resolutions by the UN. Now, what I've noticed, and again, this is social media, and I think both you and I would like to think that the United Nations is still a credible organization that can uphold the rights of the citizens of the world. But is there a sense that maybe citizens are losing a bit of trust with regards to what the United Nations are doing and their resolutions when it keeps getting broken, but there is no real accountability to what is occurring?
The interesting thing here for us is that you are speaking to someone who lives in a country that many have called an authoritarian state, where we have actually lost hope in all of our democratic institutions in the country. And then you go into the SADC community, people are losing hope in the SADC body to actually promote. You go to the African Union itself, people generally are constantly losing hope in these multilateral institutions that are meant to uphold and safeguard either the UDHR or the African Charter. But I think what is more important is active citizenship amongst ourselves. This is why we have to constantly go to the polls when it's election time, so that we elect governments that are not going to dismantle the trust that we have in these institutions. And as the Litigation Center, I mean, of course, we rely on these institutions to ensure that they work with us as civil society to promote the rule of law. And it's sad that we are continuing to see, and we know that recently one of the head of the Office of the Human Rights Commission within the UN actually resigned because of these atrocities. And it says we need to actually start taking these institutions seriously. We need to start moving away from this double standard. And again, it goes to this letter that we wrote to the African member states of the Rome Statute, because for so long they've accused the ICC of a double standard. And we are saying, here is an opportunity where you can actually go to the court and say, look, here's technical support, here's the funding that you need, here's the political support that you need to actually do the work that is necessary. Because remember, these institutions are not operating in isolation. They're actually linked to to these member states, who these member states are representatives of us as citizens. So it cannot be that we just lose hope in these institutions, but then we do not take it upon ourselves to actually do the right thing as active citizenship, to participate in actually ensuring that it still operates and does the work that it needs to do.
Melusi, I want to touch on active citizenship as a question before the next one I wanted to ask. I mean, we've seen here in South Africa, of course, pro-Palestine marches that have been happening, but we've also seen it across the world. So basically, you can have citizens really voicing their disapproval against government, but it is up to governments and, of course, heads of states to really make that meaningful contribution. And you'd like to think that the citizens are pushing for that to happen.
It becomes a very tricky question, the one that you're asking. I mean, all I can speak of is working towards ensuring that we have states that allow for active participation of citizens on either side of the divide, because we cannot have the moral high ground and say we're taking side A or side B, or we're taking side X or side Y. I think what is fundamentally important is allowing people to exercise their rights and exercise their liberties, but while doing so, ensure that international norms are adhered to, international law is adhered to. And this is why, again, we were calling on these member states to say, look, we do not want you to pick a side. We do not want to see a further divide in the polarizing politics that are happening across Africa. But what we want to do is ensure that there is rule of law and there's transparency and there is justice. And you have an opportunity as a member and signatory to the Rome Statute to use your voice to push for accountability and push for justice, wherever the injustice might come from. And of course, even on the citizens, whether it's citizens of South Africa who are pro-Palestine or even those who are pro-Israel, we are saying, look, what's important is ensuring that whichever side you are on, you are actually promoting humanity, you are promoting human rights law, and you are actually promoting justice and accountability.
Melusi, like a bully who keeps on beating up on the smaller kid, and the teacher and the headmaster just sits there and says nothing, folds their hands. What Israel's doing right now, of course, with the continuous bombing of Gaza, I mean, if they're not going to be held accountable, they will feel entitled, won't they, to continue it, because they know full well that, listen, nobody's going to touch us. Case in point, a week ago, when, of course, the United Nations General Assembly set for there to be a humanitarian ceasefire, it was completely ignored.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think it's at that point where we then have to look back at ourselves and actually put what you're saying as a mirror to say, as active citizens, what are we doing to push for our governments to say, look, we cannot allow for injustice to persist. You have to use whatever mechanisms that you have at your disposal. The International Criminal Court is one of them. And look, just on Sunday, the prosecutor, Mr. Khan, was actually at the border between Gaza and Egypt, and he was talking about the importance of law and justice. And he was saying, if I may just paraphrase, he was saying, at this particular time, we do not need the law in abstract terms. We do not need it in theory for academics and lawyers and judges, but we needed to see justice in action so that we are able to hold those who are in breach of international law accountable. Because without accountability, then we do not have a world order that is on the basis of humanity and dignity as enshrined in the UDHR, which, by the way, is commemorating 75 years this year. And it will be very sad to actually see a deterioration of these institutions that are supposed to help us hold each other accountable. But again, I want to say the indictment is on us as member states. Of course, you're right that it all falls on the government, but these are governments that are representative of the people, and therefore it's up to us to lobby our members of parliament, lobby our Congress people to say, what are you saying in ensuring that there's accountability and there's justice in these atrocities that we are constantly seeing being carried on live television in real time?
I know, Melusi, you've had your legal cap on, which you, of course, do as part of the litigation center, but I'm going to ask you to put another layer to that. Melusi, Israel's allies, of course, strongly are the United Kingdom and the United States of America. Now, of course, they have veto powers within the General Assembly and the Security Council. I mean, if these two nations and, of course, superpowers of the world continue to back Israel, it's going to be very difficult, is it, for there to be some sort of prosecution towards Israel, given that, of course, they are doing what they're doing in Gaza, and every single day these human rights organizations are saying, look, this is tantamount to genocide. Or can there be a flip side to this where really the tables are turned and the United Nations can say, look, we've got these two nations that have these veto powers, but there still needs to be accountability for so many thousands of lives that have been lost?
There may be some issues within the UN system itself, right? And you're right. I mean, there's been constant call from some members either from the global south, either from Africa as a whole, to actually, for instance, as you mentioned, the veto powers within the Security Council. There's been a call to actually change the dynamics there, maybe have a permanent voice from Africa. But I don't want to speak on that particularly because I think we do have an institution like the International Criminal Court, which has actually demonstrated with the Ukraine-Russia situation where they were actually able to investigate, and within 13 months, they came out with charges against those that they held accountable. And I think what we want to see is say, look, we understand the close ties between the US, Israeli, we understand the close ties between the UK and Israeli, and whatever that might be, what's important, because remember, we must always call out injustice wherever it might be, even if it's our allies who are actually carrying out injustices. What we need to do is say, look, what does the international law say? And I mean, the UN, the Secretary General, has been calling out to say, look, even in times of war, there are rules. Even in times of war, there are still prescripts that you have to follow. So what we are calling for is to say, look, it does not matter which side of the divide we are falling on, but what's important and fundamental is the rule of law and its justice and accountability. And I think you are right in saying maybe it might be difficult to hold the states accountable, but it will be even more difficult to hold them accountable if we, as the 33 members in Africa, are not actually using our voice. Because what you are mentioning is making me think of all of these complaints we've been seeing from the time of President Mugabe of Uganda to the time of President Zuma of South Africa, who had constantly been complaining about the double standards of the International Criminal Court. This is an opportunity, and like many other opportunities, where actually the ICC has said, look, it has jurisdiction in those areas in the Middle East where we are seeing this atrocity. So this is an opportunity to say, look, how do you then put that political pressure to the court to say, let's hold these people accountable outside of the UN system, which I must admit, there might be some issues that might need reform there to ensure that there's an inclusive voice from the global south, particularly in Africa.
Melusi, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Melusi Simela. He is, of course, from the Southern African Litigation Center. He serves as the consultant program manager. After the break, I speak to Fatima Asmal. Of course, Hilaal TV will be bringing you the Muslima conference, or Muslima Today conference that will be happening in Durban. We'll be chatting to her just to give us an idea of who will be there. Of course, what are the topics that are going to be discussed. And if you are in the KZN area, how you can go ahead and attend this. Do stay tuned.